Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much for joining us today. My name is Theo Jeb.
And I'm Philip Jeb. Welcome to Post Wild.
Today on the show, we have a very, very special guest. He is probably the most well-known face and voice for wildlife and nature in this country. He has been working as a wildlife cameraman for over 40 years. Is that right, Carl?
Oh, well, maybe not quite that long. Maybe 35.
Good stuff. I have got the amazing privilege of working with Colin for many years, but I also grew up loving his series Living the Wildlife, which ran for 44 episodes and 7 seasons. Is that right?
I believe it was 50 and 8, but who's counting?
50 and 8. Wow, fair play. IMDb needs an update. Colin, you are a fantastic voice and face for nature. You are also one of the most acclaimed wildlife filmmakers. Along with John and Seppa, you've had an incredible run in the wildlife film industry. And today we are going to do a bit of a deep dive and an expose on him and dig into some of those projects. Colin Stafford-Johnson, thank you very much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Colin, you grew up in Dublin. What was your earliest connection with nature like?
Well, I guess I was privileged to have I came from a big family, and when you're number 5 in the big family, you sort of get to do what you want. And I was grew up in a place called Cabinteely. At the time, we had a garden centre and nursery business surrounded by fields. And we were allowed to wander at will, and it was one of those things you got up in the morning and you decided what you were going to do, and you basically went out the door. And if you heard the lunchtime gong that my mother would have on that front step, you came back for lunch. And if you didn't, you didn't. But anyway, a huge amount of time to go and wander and explore, from catching pinkeens down to the stream to collecting frog spawn, all those simple little things of childhood. But they got really into birds at an early age. I loved birds. The great thing about having an interest in birds is that no matter where you go in the world, there's always a bird there. First thing I do when I step off a plane anywhere in the world now is just start looking at birds because there's always something to see. But I got really into birds and that sort of thing. And then when I was about 8 years of age, my parents got a little country cottage down by the Devil's Glen in County Wicklow. And then I was able to expand my horizons some more. Just as I grew out of my little territory in Cabinteely, I was presented with this whole new range of habitat that I could expand into. And the timing couldn't have been better. And I just loved that sense of having absolute freedom. I've been able to wander around, identify things and record things. I was good at recording things in those days, probably better than I am now. And unfortunately, all the little diaries I had all got burnt in a house fire, unfortunately. So I had all these little notes, which would be funny to look back on now. They were probably quite naive. People forget in those days it was actually quite hard to get information. Information was not readily available. And so you had your series of books, but they were quite bland, really, and fairly basic. So I'm envious of people who have an interest in natural history now, just the amount of information that they have at their disposal. It's fantastic.
That's fantastic, Colin. And then when did you know that you really wanted to film wildlife? How did that catch you?
Well, I set off, I guess I could point it really back to one moment in terms of, there's quite a progression from this moment. I was about 7 years old. It was a Sunday afternoon, a wet Sunday afternoon. And my grandfather lived with us, with my family when I was growing up. And he had a room called the study. And it was floor-to-ceiling books. I remember one wet Sunday afternoon and the big old velvet curtains were closed. You could hear the rain against the window and little fire crackling. And my parents had left encyclopedias on the bottom shelf but one, where we could access them, I guess. And I pulled open this encyclopedia. I pulled it off the shelf. I opened it up and I saw a story about this bird called a bowerbird from Papua New Guinea. And I could not believe what I was reading, that this male bird constructed this thing purely to lure a female. It wasn't nothing to do with nest building. He built this structure. He was effectively an artist, and he built a structure to lure the female. I remember saying to myself, one day I'm going to go to that place. And my mind at the time was full of, Orem Ballantyne, the Coral Sea and Robinson Crusoe and the South Pacific Islands. And that mix, so it was after I left school, I was about, travelled overseas, backpacked around the world for about 3 years, and I ended up in Papua New Guinea. I ended up on top of the tallest mountain, and I set off on a 4-month journey from there to the sea, walking through the forest, building rafts, getting dugout canoes, looking for bowerbirds and birds of paradise. And it changed my entire view of the world, because that place at that time, not only were the most remote people probably left in the world on the borders between what was then Papua New Guinea and Irian Jaya. Now it's known as West Papua, I think that part of Indonesia. But you'd no sense of a border being there. It was just this massive contiguous forest. I remember standing on top of a hill one day, and all you could see in every direction, from mile after mile, a mountain peak after mountain peak after mountain peak, was just rainforest. Nothing, no break in it. And it just felt almost like your sense, your childhood sense of, the world had just been created. It was perfect. And then getting back to Ireland and seeing, again, sitting on a hill and looking over a landscape not far from where I live now, and seeing how every single bit of land had been affected by the hand of man, either directly or indirectly through his farm animals. And I got this sense that the world was going to change very, very fast. And I wanted to do something involved in that line. And I probably didn't, although I trained in science, I probably didn't have the mental discipline to be a scientist. I had friends who were doing great work, counting how many, leaves a monkey eats in a day. But I just felt that wasn't going to be for me. I really admired their dedication, but I felt I couldn't do that. And I really fell into filmmaking. I was actually on the Salty Islands, and I bumped into a filmmaker called Cindy Buxton. Her dad used to run, she was a camera woman, and her dad used to run a company called Survival Anglia. And she was making a film out there, and I was looking at her lifestyle, and I thought, coming to places like this with a camera and being able to spend half your life in wild places, that just is something that I think I could do. And as it happened, I had just bought an old Land Rover with the idea of driving to Cape Town. It's just as well this journey didn't happen, because it was a pretty crappy old Land Rover, to tell you the truth. So I brought all the sand ladders for the Sahara Desert and everything else, but I'm not sure if we actually would have gotten as far as the Sahara Desert. But as it happened, luckily the first Gulf War started, and we weren't allowed to go across Algeria. So I had to abandon that plan. And then I thought, no, I'll go off to Central America for 6 months instead. And I stopped off at the dentist in London, because you could get your teeth checked for free in those days in London. And while I was in that dental surgery, I saw a guide to the universities of Britain. And there was, I believe at the time, it was the second worst university in England, University of Derby. And they had a new degree called biological imaging, essentially training one to be a wildlife filmmaker. And I did that for 3 years. And as soon as I finished that on a Friday, and I got a job with a wildlife cameraman on the Saturday. And I've been gainfully employed, unemployed ever since.
Fantastic, Colin. How exciting. This is putting you on the spot now. Do you remember where we first met?
Probably in a bar someplace there. No, I'm trying to think, where did we first meet? Well, would it have been in crossing the line in Greystones, possibly in the office?
Very close. It was actually in Wildscreen, at Wildscreen Festival the year before, when you were with 2010, when you were there with Broken Tail.
Ah.
So could you please explain to the viewers what Wildscreen is?
Well, Wildscreen is the big natural history film festival in the world, really. It's the one that everyone goes to. There's Wildscreen in Bristol in the UK, and then on alternate years, they have the Jackson Hole Film Festival in America. And when you're in our industry, they are the really important film festivals. And so it's the place you go, well, when you're a self-employed cameraman. You normally go into them, in all honesty, to find work. And you sort of hear, because the thing about the wildlife filming industry, it can be quite isolating, in fact. And you often don't know what's happening, what other people are up to in other places. So it's a good opportunity to get together. And you get to see lots of different films, and you find out about the latest technologies and all that sort of thing. And you pick up a few tips from fellow camera people and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, it's a really important festival. I remember going there for the first time when I was in college and being quite overawed by the whole thing, because I had all these sort of heroes, these sort of wildlife cameramen and women who were pretty remarkable people that I really admired. And I remember trying to shuffle up beside them and have a word in their ear. So then as I got into the business, I was always quite aware of maybe you were one of them shuffling up to me, even though you're a bit tall to shuffle up to me. You announced your presence, which is more in a more Theo Jeb way, I would have thought. It's been an interesting place over the years.
Fantastic, Colin. Yeah. So what I'd love to do now is we'd love to show some living the wildlife. So this is a trip down memory lane, Colin.
Bats have always had a bad press, and I really don't know why. They don't like graveyards any more than we do, and they're certainly not flying mice. In fact, they're much more closely related to us humans than they are to any kind of rodent. As far as we know, there are 10 species found in Ireland, and over the next couple of days, I'm hoping to find 2 of my favourites. Connor knew of another place nearby where he was sure there'd be some long ears.
Colin, looking at this, 50 episodes and 8 seasons, did you say?
Yeah, that's right. And I remember this was one of my favourites, because I was working with Conor Kelleher, who's just one of the most remarkable people I've met. I think he's just got an extraordinary knowledge. And what was great about making that series was actually to come across all these people around Ireland who were just really good at what they did, passionate about what they did. And Conor in particular, this extraordinary knowledge of bats. And so it was a great opportunity for me to learn from all these experts, because, I'd go with a general knowledge, but that would be honed by people like Conor. Oh, he was we had some laughs, that's for sure. He's a great guy, a great guy.
See, Colin, that must have been fantastic, getting to travel around the country so much and spending so much time getting to know all these people. And what's your... It's also interesting, when did you first start living the wildlife? What year?
Oh, Lord. Basically, I kept a track of years up to about 1988, and ever since, and the years that my children were born, and after that, I'm not terribly sure.
But so it must have been an interesting position that you found yourself in, where you were trying to communicate the ecological degradation that was going on and the different conservation measures. On reflection of the country over the last in your lifetime, how do you feel Ireland's done with our protection of wilderness?
Oh, well, it's done incredibly badly. I mean, ever since I was being brought up, I heard someone was saying to me, that last year was a good year for corncrakes. Well, it might have been a good year compared to the year before, but not to the year I was born, where there are thousands of them. And in fact, I used to go to my uncle's house in Stillorgan in the early 1970s, and there were corncrakes calling there.
I was going to say, do you remember when they were in Dublin? Yes, obviously you do, yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, what happened really, the story of Ireland, is that we went from a fairly simple agriculture to more industrial style agriculture. And the land, I mean, farmers were asked to do something, and they did it very well. But they were asked to produce food sort of at any cost. And the environment was externalized from those decision makings for many, many years. It's starting to change slowly, but for many years they had carte blanche and could do whatever. Production was the only thing that was important. And most of our senior politicians, I mean, I was brought up at the time when my school textbook, my official school textbook from the Department of Education, described bogs as wastelands. So you had a whole generation of people who, if they studied hard at school, would go, okay, bogs are wastelands, because that's what they learnt. And we still have a long way to go to catch up, to actually change our textbooks. Well, I read them now. People say the system has changed not nearly enough, not nearly as quickly, not in response to the emergency that we are now in on the global level when it comes to biodiversity and that sort of thing. Most people still don't care too much, I think, because they just don't understand it, haven't been exposed to it, and don't, it's not all that difficult a concept, really, but it's something that is not promoted in our school education system for sure. Yeah. And so people, as they drive around Ireland, they look out the window thinking how green it is, without realising that, well, it actually shouldn't all be green all the time. Yeah. What you're looking at is industrial fossil fuel green, because it's fuelled by fertilisers. And those fertilizers, when you throw fertilizer onto a grassland, you turn it into a field of grass. And the difference, a grassland is a semi-natural system which is full of all sorts of wildflowers. But in industrial farming, there's no room for those. When you put on fertilizers, the grasses will outcompete the wildflowers, and you end up with these sort of monoculture deserts. And indeed, the area where I live now, I remember lots of little ponds around the place, all gone. All the wildflower meadows in my area, gone. Nothing left. So a poor little insect flying across the field, there is nothing. There is nothing for them. But it's a change that's been sort of gradual. So it happens before your eyes, but slowly, and you don't notice it until suddenly it's kind of all gone.
And then in terms of shifting baselines, because we've discussed this with other people as well, but shifting baselines plays into this as well. So people can only really remember, oh, my childhood was really rich in nature because I remember X, Y, and Z. And then, as you say, without realizing, compared to their parents' childhood or compared to, a different child. And actually, I was a bit spoiled with my upbringing, and I was exposed to a lot of wildlife. So my baseline was much, it was unnaturally good in terms of hopium definitely seeps into me a little bit, thinking, oh, it's, there are still pockets of wilderness around, but as you say, it's such fragmented little pockets. But in terms of shifting baselines, as you say, you saw corncrake growing up in Dublin, and there's been such a big shift. Are there any other big shifts, negative-wise, before we get into, there are some positives, but other big negative shifts that you've seen over that time?
Well, I suppose generally just the degradation of our rivers and things like that. The problem with the rivers and with the ocean is that people sort of look at their surface when they don't realize that if you want to live in water, it's all about the chemistry of that water. The water itself looks the same. It's a bit like the chemistry of the air. Unless you're in a highly polluted place, the air just looks like air. But you don't realize that the chemical composition can be changing. The chemical composition of our rivers has changed radically. It's full of all sorts of stuff that shouldn't be there. And just by looking at rivers now with a slightly closer eye, you see, algae and things growing where there should be none. But we're so used to rivers now looking like that we accept that that's the way they look. The ocean is the same. Most of us interact with the ocean by looking on top of it. But, not knowing what goes underneath it. If I go down to, not too far from here, I go down to Dunleary and go to the end of the pier and look out across the ocean. It looks the same as it always did, but what's happening underneath, it has changed completely. So often these changes really aren't being seen, and so you can't blame people for not realizing what's actually going on. But I mean, there are so many cases, so many animals their populations have shrunk hugely. But then, as you say, there are a few positives too. And one of those I noticed, so I have a little garden down in Wicklow, and I was wandering down towards that garden last summer. And as I wandered down the track, a pine marten crossed the road in front of me. Now, when I was a kid, if I'd seen the pine marten, I would have collapsed because I knew all the little animals in my area. We'd nothing as exciting as a pine marten. So, and then as I continued on my walk and was turning into my garden, I heard a greater spotted woodpecker drumming from the woods. Now, when I was a kid, there were no greater spotted woodpeckers around where I lived. As I walked into my garden, in the distance, I could hear a buzzard mewing. There were no buzzards in Wicklow when I was a kid. And as I walked up to my little cabin, I saw a shadow in the grass, and I looked overhead, and a red kite flew by. There were no red kites in County Wicklow when I was a kid. And my very first job as a wildlife filmmaker was actually filming red kites on a nest in Wales. And at that time, there were only about 20 pairs left in Britain. So there's an example of a huge success. Things have absolutely fundamentally changed. But then, when I think about it more around where I live now, there used to be lots of kestrels. I haven't seen one in 3 years in my area. Because kestrels needed those sort of, that rough grassland and that sort of thing. I haven't seen a bar now like I used to see again. They depend on that rough grassland. So as we change the land, we'll always favour it for some, and it'll be tougher for others. I mean, all those, the red kites and the buzzards and the pine martens, they were poisoned out of existence. Stop poisoning, they come back. The habitat was there. That's easy. Quite a few creatures have much more specific habitat requirements, and they're the ones in trouble. Golden eagles are in trouble. Golden eagles in Donegal. When you go to, God bless them, trying to find some food in Donegal, to be honest. Because I've filmed in similar mountains in Scotland, and you're used to seeing lots of grouse and hares and that sort of stuff all over the mountains. But Donegal, you can go for a day's walk and see very, very, very little.
They have to resort to eating baby badgers and foxes, so their whole diets have changed. And so that's the thing. It's bringing back these species is great to then realize the issues that are in the environment, because golden eagles were brought back, and there was an amazingly successful campaign of getting the public behind it and all the political will, and it all finally happened. And there's only four pairs now that are still breeding, and they've brought back over almost 200 birds. I think it was over 150 birds. So it just shows how degraded the landscape is.
Well, they've done us a good service then, as you say, because if they show, well, why are they not breeding? Probably a fairly simple relationship with food and the lack of food. And then you also sort of think, it's not far to where golden eagles live. You think if the habitat had been right, they probably would have ended up here. Saying that, white-tailed eagles were brought in, and they really seem to be doing well. And that's really interesting to see how well they've taken off. And I was there at the day that they released the very first lot down in Killarney National Park, and I was sort of expecting them to wander up the west coast to, the most remote places. Nothing could be further from the truth. They settled on the Shannon when they're as happy as Larry. All these poor innocent ducks swimming around have no idea what's coming from above now, and the fish is endless perch and things like that, so they've no shortage of food, and hopefully they are going to become a part of our landscape once again.
It's so interesting you say that as well, because the reason we also thought that they were going to go straight, that was a lot in our psyche of that was the last places they were seen, was on those very fringes because of the persecution. So that's so interesting that we had that concept of, well, the white-tailed eagles, they need very remote, far off places, but as you say, it actually, as soon as you have the habitat, they're happy as Larry.
That's it. Animals really don't mind. People think animals mind about noise. Not really, and things like that. It just habitat, a place where they can, sleep and raise families and find food, and so many of our animals are quite adaptable, and by their nature, because we're an island that's actually a very young island, we're only a few thousand years old, and so the animals that were moving from continental Europe north and west, it stands to reason they were the animals that could move about the place, so they tend to be not so specialized, the ones that we have. And then we probably brought quite a few here with us. Many of the things we think are native animals, yeah, they've been here a long time, but most things have probably been brought here by man.
This is fascinating. I didn't know we were going to get into this, but I'd love to dig in a little bit, because this is such a fascinating thing. Do you know, it's like, as you say, it's such a murky past. Ireland's such a new country. Like 10,000 years ago, we had massive ice sheets. So our history was quite wiped clean from 10,000 years ago. And then there's a lot of hypothesizing of how these creatures got here. And people think that maybe we brought red deer in dugout canoes, but then also the argument against that was what were the wolves and the bears eating and all that kind of stuff.
True natives versus aliens.
True natives, but there's so many stories like the red squirrel. Maybe they were brought in by the Vikings. With the lynx, we only have one bone. We haven't found any beavers yet, but there's exactly yet. But so yeah, I'd just love to what's your view on what's native, what's not, and what's important?
It's so hard to know. I suppose genetics will probably solve quite a few of these things for us. The great thing, genetics doesn't lie, it seems, and so a lot of those mysteries. Otherwise, it's just down to a matter of opinion, really. And I suppose any animal that's here really that's now sort of self-sustaining. Over a long period of time, over, hundreds of years, I suppose we can pretty much consider as native enough. At the end of the day, if the sea hadn't filled in, if we'd stayed attached to Britain for another 1,000 years, we'd have had a whole load of other stuff. Britain has got so much more stuff than we have. And then France has got so much more stuff than Britain has. So we do suffer from that thing of, if you're an island, the further you are from the continental landmass, the less biodiversity you will have.
Simplified.
Yeah. But they just say something about those animals that got there were the ones that were able to move. So they're probably quite resilient ones, because extinction has not been a big part of our story.
So Colin, when I very first started doing work experience, I started doing work experience with Crossing the Line. I also started to get it when I was 16, and I also got to do work experience with the late Eamon Butler. But when I was in Crossing the Line, they were cutting the sizzle reel of Broken Tail, and I remember watching it thinking, wow, that film looks so interesting. It was just you explaining the story. It was a black backdrop, you just explained the story. I'd just love to play a little bit of the trailer of this film, because it's a truly beautiful film.
I remember distinctly the last time I saw him. Big, powerful, relaxed and arrogant. walked up towards me, closer and closer, and I was just so excited. And then I turned to look back. Broken Tail was gone.
Oh, it's a strange feeling to see him again. You know, I spent so many hours on his trail, and he was the first, no, not actually the first tiger cub I ever saw. I'd seen another little family, but the first tiger cub I ever spent any time with. I guess my first real break in the industry came when I'd been to that Wild Screen Festival that we were speaking of. It's a great way to meet producers, and I'd sent them a little reel of things I had shot in Wales, you know, rabbits and kites and seals and basic things, and I'd sent this show reel off to a very well-known producer called Mike Burkhead, and he phoned me up a couple of weeks later and he said, "Oh, Carl, yeah, I saw your show reel, didn't say much about it. Said, I'm making a tiger film in India." And he said, "Would you like to be involved?" And I was going, "Yes," trying to sort of sound cool. And yeah. And what would you like me to do? And he said, "I'd like you to film it." And I think there might have been a little hesitation because he said, "Would that be okay?" And I was going, "Sure, yeah, absolutely, yeah." And he said, "I assume you have all the camera gear?" Yeah. Well, I had a flat that I sold very quickly to buy the camera gear. And so I ended up arriving in India, never having been to India, knowing nothing about tigers, and driving into the gates of Ranthambore it was really the old days of, you know, go to India, find a tiger and bring us back a story. The great days of wildlife filmmaking that will probably never return. And there's a real sense of adventure, having to go in and having to learn how this place worked, having to figure out how tigers worked. And my first thing I had to do was I had to find a tiger that I could follow. And I came across the backdrop of Ranthambore National Park. You've got this incredible old fort that's thousands of years old, and then you've got these beautiful lakes. And probably the most photogenic tiger habitat in the world is right there on the lakes. And there was a female tigress who sort of owned the lakes at that time, and she had 3 cubs. They were about 18 months old, and they were about to strike off on their own. And I thought, right, I'm going to follow one of those cubs. And I watched them for about a month, and I said, there's something about this one. Just had a little bit more confidence, seemed a little bit more at home still in the mother's territory. And I thought, let's follow her. And she became the world's most famous tiger. Her name was Matchley. And I followed her as she set up a territory. Her mother ceded most of the territory to her. She claimed this fantastic territory. I spent the next few hundred days of my life following her and watching her meet her first mate, and then to have her first family. And she had these 2 wonderful little cubs that were called Broken Tail and Slantir. And I watched them grow up until one day they suddenly just disappeared. There was no sign of them. And we had no idea what had happened to them. And about a year later, I got an email from someone who said, "Did you hear that a tiger was just killed at this place called Dara, which was about 200 kilometers from Ranthambore, a place where a tiger had no right to be?" And I said, "Could you send me a photo?" They sent me the photo, and I recognized it as Broken Tail. And it set up a whole series of questions in my head. How on earth did Broken Tail end up in a place like that? And we went on this horse journey to go and discover what happened to him. And I had tried to sell this film at the BBC, and they kind of, we can't really make a film about the dead tiger. But I sat down with John Murray. I had just met him at the time, who runs Crossing the Line Films with Sappa Gilman. And I sat down with John, and he just said, "Is there any film you'd really love to make?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to tell the story of this dead tiger." And John said, "Let's do it. Let's find a way to do it." And John's one of those people. People like me can't operate without people like John, because he has the persistence and the patience to just get projects up and running. And it's a real skill. Besides being a great cameraman, producer, director, everything else, he has the persistence to actually get projects off the ground. And that's what this one needed. And it was a great project. And it's probably the only one I ever made, the film I can look back on in my career, that actually made a fundamental difference. Because the place where Broken Tail died was declared a new national park, a new tiger reserve in Rajasthan. And a place where, in that film, in the middle of that film, I stopped at a place called Ramgarh Sanctuary. And I'm saying, we need to find all the places in India that are like this, because you're standing in the middle of this sanctuary. It's completely quiet. And in a nation of 1.4 billion people, it's quite hard to find quiet places. What we need, and that has now been made a national park too. So there are tigers at both of those places, and tigers are now able to leave Ranthambore and wander through the hills and find these other reserves. So although Broken Tail, he had left Ranthambore probably just because he was looking for a female. I have a dog at the moment that's a bit like that. A great big Bernese Mountain Dog that started to wander. And they often think, just like Broken Tail, he got to that age where he needed to find a female. There were big tigers around Ranthambore at the time. He had no choice really of staying there. And he set off into the great unknown. And he just kept wandering. But what he didn't know was that there were no members of his kind out there. And so he's just getting himself into deeper and deeper trouble. But when we found him, or when we saw the photos, we could see he was in perfect condition. He wasn't some emaciated tiger on his last leg, so he had survived. That meant there was food, habitat, and water out there somewhere. And our horse journey revealed where that was.
Wow, fascinating. Colin.
It was the one that really sits out. To look back, I kind of go, yeah, that's the film which I think the fact we made it actually made a difference. That feels good.
That's really, really fantastic, Colin. So, yeah, that's a really inspiring thing. As you were mentioning about the festivals earlier on, I met you in 2010 at Wild Screen, and then we worked together on a project called Secret Life of the Shannon over the course of the next 2 years. But the following year, 2011, Broken Tail was nominated for 3 awards at Jackson Hole. It was nominated for presenting, sound, and Best Picture, I think, was it?
Yeah, I remember the
Best
best
feature.
picture. I don't remember the other. Oh yeah, no, I do, because I was the presenter. There you go. Oh yeah. But I do, yes.
So I got to go as a volunteer. So I was with you, John and Sepp. I was there watching you guys on the night, and you guys not only won each of your categories, you also won the overall film of festival, which, to me, watching from the audience was such an amazing, inspiring thing. But could you tell us about that? Because presumably you had known about the Grand Teton Award and stuff throughout your career. So how did that feel, winning such prestigious awards for this?
Well, I have to say, it did feel pretty good. And, again, as a self-employed person, you're thinking, well, this award hopefully will lead to more work. When you call, your name's called, you're walking up the stage. As I'm wandering up, hopefully I can get a bit more work out of this now. In all honesty, that's what I was thinking, because you're always living on that knife edge. But it was great. And I thought it would get the film out there more. And, but we were against it. I forget who we were against that year, but all sorts of the top Attenborough shows, all that sort of stuff, all the creme de la creme of the industry. But I think what Crossing the Line had done was, or between us all, we'd sort of come up with a slightly different style and a personal account, a personal story about an animal. I quite like those films now. I quite like when there's a mix between people and animals. I think they can be more honest films. Sometimes when you film an animal in complete isolation, you're not really showing it as it is. But I felt in Broken Tail, we sort of pretty much showed it as it was. And that was more interesting than showing just an animal living in a sort of a tiger paradise. You're actually showing the modern world and how animals are trying to survive in it. So, but to win that prize was really something else in our industry, because that is the one that everyone wants. And, you're up against really big budget series and that kind of thing. And people were looking at us thinking, who are these guys? So it was fun, I have to say.
So then, Colin, the pressure was on for you, John and Seppa, for the next project you were working on, which, again, for me, I was incredibly privileged to get on. For that, especially the first couple of months, I was mainly ballast in a canoe, lying down, keeping the canoe nice and flat in the wall.
I'd forgotten that. So you did. Hilarious. So in lots of the scenes, see, when I'm paddling along on my own, you're actually lying down as ballast. It was one of the most useful functions you ever served, to be honest, Jeff. You make perfect. If you ever want a reference, I say he plays ballast like you wouldn't believe. Yes.
So Peter, let's play a bit of the Shannon, because this is such a beautiful film. So.
Early mornings for me are some of the best times. The dawn chorus comes and the reeds are full of bird song, and it's a wonderful, happy time.
So, Colin, we spent about 2 years making that film, and then again, it was nominated for a lot of things at Jackson Hole and Wild Screen. And how did that film do?
Well, it did, yeah. Then, so I think it was the following year. It was the following year. It was nominated at Wild Screen, and it won the Wild Screen Festival, the Golden Panda, which was the other really big award in our industry. We nearly fell over. And then it was the following year we stuck it into the Jackson Hole Film Festival again, and we won that one. So at the time, I think it was the first film to ever win both those awards. First film in the history of the business to win both awards. And so as it turned out, we actually won the top award in the world for 3 years in a row, which had never happened before and probably never will again. But it was just one of those times when things came together. And yeah, it's not so much the awards, but just that sense of that when you've made something, it's always a privilege that people actually get to watch it. And when you make an award-winning film, it just tends to get out so lots of people get to see it. And that's and Emer Reynolds was the editor for this film, and she had edited Broken Tale too, and she's just a bit of a genius. She's fantastic, and I think the start of the Shannon film, I just think she did in the opening, sort of that opening thing that we were just watching. She just put it together beautifully, because you can have all the great shots in the world. It's how you put them together. It's how you integrate the voice and the music and the natural sounds and the images. And that's the real skill, I think, in filmmaking. Each of the individual parts you can do, but it takes a certain person to actually be able to put them all together and put them down and then create that sort of magic, I guess.
It's such a beautiful film, and it's so nice looking back on it, all the amazing moments and time we got to spend in the field.
I remember you and I down with that sedge warbler.
Yeah.
I forget the name of the little place, a little harbour on the Shannon. There just happened to be one sedge warbler that didn't care about us at all, and he'd just sit there in that reed and just sing happily all day long. Yeah, lovely.
So then, Colin, the next film was the stunning Wild Ireland, which also, again, you've had such a acclaimed career, but we just love to play the start of this, because again, it's a stunning film.
The west coast of Ireland for millennia was really, I guess, the edge of the known world. Our ancestors had no idea what lay beyond the horizon. The vast Atlantic was a place of complete mystery. My name is Colin Stafford-Johnson. I've spent 30 years working as a wildlife cameraman around the world, and I've seen some of the most beautiful places on earth, but somehow I'm always drawn back to the west coast of Ireland. This is where
You lived in Westport for a long time, Colin.
I did, yeah. I sort of raised my girls in Westport, and I think, as I said here, once you've lived not far from the sea, it's really hard to leave it behind. It was a lovely place to live. And you know, when I was I climbed Crowpatrick before I chose to live in Westport, and there was a little doodle I used to do as a kid when I was bored in school, and I used to draw a little house and a little garden around it, and there'd be a little copse of trees, and there was a mountain in the background, and a little town amongst the hills in the distance, and a bay. And I suddenly realised from the top of Crowpatrick, I was looking at my doodle, and it was like a living doodle. It was all there before me, and I thought, I could live here. This has got so many of the things that I want from life. And when you travel a lot, you realise how much we have in this country in terms of just security, and just, we're just incredibly fortunate. And I think I've lived through an incredible time in this country. I've seen so many positive changes too in terms of society and things. And the west of Ireland, always loved. And Westport itself was just a lovely town. Sure, it gets its tourism, but they just a lovely level of tourism. But there's just a great mixed sort of local population, and it's I love going back there now because you can't walk down the street without having a good chat with someone, and it's not genuine chats with people. Do you know they're pleased to see you again, and I'm pleased to see them, and it's that will always be there. I live in Wicklow now, sort of return to the county of my youth, I suppose. But yeah, Westport and that area, the west of Ireland, will always hold a very special place for me. That's for sure.
Nice. And then Colin, the last show we'd like to show is Wild Gardener. We'll put your social channels here, Colin, but what Colin's now doing, it's almost like a living documentary. If you go onto his Instagram, you can see him talking fascinating information about the plants and wildflowers that are found in our gardens. I'm not calling them weeds on purpose, because that Dave Goulson quote, I'm sure it's a beautiful quote of how to get rid of all the weeds in your garden, start calling them wildflowers. That's so nice. But so yeah, Colin, we'd love to just show this and kind of get your reflections on making this film as well.
I've always loved wild places where nature's in charge. But I grew up in a very different world, a world of pristine lawns and perfect roses. Gardening was my family's life. My dad was a TV gardener. But my playgrounds were always the woods and the wild. My name is Colin Stafford-Johnson. I'm a wildlife cameraman, and I've spent most of my life filming some of the most amazing creatures and places on planet Earth. But now I'm coming home. On the east coast of Ireland, I want to turn my old childhood garden into a haven for wildlife. Now, I'm no gardener, but over the next couple of years, I want to transform this long abandoned acre completely. My plan is to go native, to only use plants that naturally occur on this island. I'm going to dig ponds, sow wildflower meadows, plant hedgerows and native woodlands, all in the hope of attracting as many creatures as possible to come and live here with me. I'm going to create my very own wild garden.
So Colin, what I'd love you to reflect on, I suppose, is it's such a learning experience, I'm sure, getting into the wild gardening, and what's that journey been like for you?
Oh, well, it's been wonderful. It's been quite a change. My dad was the first TV gardener in Ireland. His name was Barney Johnson. We had the garden centre and the nursery. And I often think, what would he think now? And I think he'd actually just completely, fully agree with me, actually. Because in those days, even back in the 1970s, all around where I lived in County Wicklow, there were wildflower meadows. There were ponds, there were wild hedgerows and things like that. So to have this little patch around your tamed area around your house was no big deal. To have plants from all around the world, what I call a collection of plants, as opposed to a community of plants. So you'd have a plant collection, tend to be the same old plants, actually, in all honesty, that most of us stick in our gardens. But that wasn't a big deal because all those wild places are out there. The natural places were out there. But since that time, and my dad died when I was 15, back in 1979, and so he didn't see all those changes that have happened since we joined the Common Agricultural Policy, and that so many of those habitats had disappeared. So it seemed to me to make sense, as all the wildness has gone from those places, why not get those flowers that can no longer survive in most places in the wild and bring them to live around where we live. And the idea that, I've got my little place to live, my little cabin, little house, but surely that's enough. Why not give the little bit of land we have over to nature? And people say, well, exotic plants, do they do any harm? Well, the only thing I would say, there isn't a single nature reserve in the world that needs an exotic plant. If you were to go, say, to Argentina, and you were given the job of looking after an acre of land in Argentina, would you get there thinking that what this place really needs is an oak tree, a silver birch, and a few cowslips? No, you wouldn't. That would be ridiculous. You would be planting native. And so what I decided to do around my patch was to go native. And I was standing in it one day, and I saw a butterfly fly overhead. And I thought, what does that creature need? rather than what do I want? What does it need to live here? And so I learned, I mean, I knew a good bit about this sort of thing, but I've learned a lot more. And that it's the little creatures that rule the world after all. And so now I've created a habitat where lots and lots, I think the other day I had 14 species of butterfly in my garden, and I don't know how many species of dragonflies and damselflies. And just the small creatures now give me huge pleasure. And that's where, I think there's an awful lot of negative stories around, and you often can get pretty depressed. And I did for many years until I got to a stage where I thought I'm going to have to push them away. And this garden to me now, when I wander around it, as I do every day, you just get that wonderful sense of, even when I'm not here, it's getting on with itself. All these little creatures are now able to get on with their lives. In the middle of Christmas, I know the butterflies aren't there, but their pupae are there, or the caterpillars are hibernating. They're all still there, just waiting to come back. All the wildflower seeds, I might have cut the meadows, the wildflower seeds are in the soil. They're all ready to come back next spring. And it would only take me really one day a year to look after it. And, I don't want to spend my time looking after a manicured garden. So really, native plants are the key. They are the key, and we need no chemicals, no fertilizers, no pesticides. Nothing needs to be watered. You could be in the middle of the biggest drought, and every plant in my garden looks completely healthy because they're adapted to live in this climate. And that for me, so it's like creating a little nature reserve around your house. Now, it's never, the most important thing of all is that we don't wreck any more habitats. Like any habitat that's been around for hundreds of years is far more important than my garden. But at least it gives me a real sense. And now I bring people there too to teach them about the natural world, but with things that they can actually see. And say, if you plant a meadow like this, these animals will come to your garden. If you plant a pond like this, the dragonflies, the damselflies will come and lay eggs in your garden. The frogs will come, the newts will come. It will all come if you give them the place to live. So you can learn an awful lot more about the natural world by having a garden like this. Whereas, as I say, it's a community of plants rather than going down your garden centre where you get plants from all over the world, stick them together. They don't know each other. And that's just for our visual pleasure. That, to me, and even now I sometimes have to fight myself not doing straight lines and things, because that's almost, I was brought up with that. But now I'm fighting it, and now I'm just letting nature is pretty much designing the garden at this stage, and I'm trying to be a slightly sort of invisible hand, just pushing it in little directions. Because if I was to abandon it completely, well, in fact, it would become, I was going to say an oak forest, it would become covered in cherry laurel, unfortunately. But if it wasn't for the cherry laurel, it would become an oak forest. That's what it wants to be. So it's always going to be a semi-natural habitat, but it's a vital place for lots of little creatures. The little butterflies that lay their eggs there, the dragonflies, or the frogs that live in the pond, they don't care if it's a semi-natural habitat. It's got everything they need, and that's all I really care about.
That's such a lovely point, that if you plant the plants and the habitat, then the animals will come. And I think that's that's quite modern thinking. And it was really interesting that you said that at the start, that we've learned so much as a society. And then even joining the Common Agricultural Policy and the amount of degradation we've done to our land, as you say, we've also managed to develop socially a lot as a country. So with all this stuff, it is a balance of things, isn't it? But I think it's so good that we do have champions like you out here for nature.
Well, I think we need sustaining. What I would like is that every animal that lived in Ireland the year I was born, I'd like all those creatures have self-sustaining populations the year I die. I'd like them all to be here. Now, there will always be, no matter how we've used the land, even every piece of land that humans have ever used on Earth, things we do will favour some species over others. That's inevitable. My garden, depending how I manage it, I favour things over others, sometimes without knowing quite how, because everything is so complicated. But surely the island is big enough for us, and the knowledge base is there now. There are lots of great people out there now who are really knowledgeable. The Biodiversity Data Centre down the Waterford, they're the people I go, if I want to really learn about something, that's where I go to double check my facts, because there are lots of opinions out there. And it's great to get the facts sometimes. And I go there and I go, if they say it's right, that's right. That's the way I'm going to go. So their advice for anyone who wants to improve their land for wildlife, they are the place. They are sort of my go-to for information.
That's fantastic you say that, and I could not agree with you more that we do need to be data-driven and rely on the science, and they're a fantastic source of all that. So it's fantastic you brought that up.
I think of them. I think of them as the inland revenue of the natural world. You know, for a small bunch of people, they're incredibly efficient. Really, really impressive. Every one of them I've met is just, and they're not only just. They don't only just have the knowledge, but they're very good at chatting to people about it. Companies or farmers or individuals. And so I couldn't recommend them.
Absolutely. I think they're community, and they're the All Ireland Pollinator Plan. So that's to conclude, I would love to touch on the potential positives, with tempering it with, obviously we're coming up to the start line, it feels, of trying to bring back our nature. We're not quite at the start line yet. Our pollinators are still decreasing. Our corncrakes and our curlews are very much on life support, but there has been some really positive changes. As you say, certain things will always be coming in, and things like climate change actually can have like, we've got egrets and woodpeckers and buzzards and harriers and ospreys even return naturally. So in terms of the positives, and you're in the most rosy estimates, what do you really hope to see over the course of the next kind of 2 decades?
Well, I just hope we're fortunate in this country in some ways that lots of the habitats we love are sort of semi-natural habitats, really. They're habitats that were very heavily relied on man's past activities. And a lot of them, okay, like a meadow I create, it's going to be nothing like as good as a 100-year-old meadow, but it's pretty damn good. You know, it's not all the way there, but it's well on the way there. And hopefully it'll still be there in 100 years. There's an awful lot we can do. There's an awful lot farmers can do, and it's starting to change. There's a lot of young farmers. The older farmers wouldn't have had the opportunity. They weren't looking at. They didn't have the,
perspective.
Well, yeah, they didn't, and it's something which we can only do if we're all a bit more comfortable. Then we can start to look at the land in a different way. You know, back in the 60s in Ireland, 70s in Ireland, rural life was very tough. And so people were doing whatever they could to make a living. But I think we've now gotten to a point, and with some of these new grants that are coming in that are favouring nature-friendly farming, that sort of thing, they are being really pretty well received. There's always a lobby out there that are trying to poo-poo all these ideas, but there's a lot more reception out there to these ideas. I think our woodlands are going to expand. I think our rivers are going to get cleaner. I think we're going to stop overfishing the sea. Ireland is not going to be a country covered in wildflowers meadows anymore, but there's going to be enough of them created in the future to keep those self-sustaining populations of animals. And I'm seeing, really good things happening around the country too. And mostly there's an age profile of people who are getting into positions of power, who are really very enlightened and who have much more understanding now. And so I'm hoping that we can turn this tide, because it'd be a terrible shame not to. Why not live in a beautiful country? And there are many parts of this country which, to me, they may look green and kind of nice, but really pretty much a desert. And when you have a biodiversity desert, to me, that's not very exciting. And I think when you get wildlife back, and when you hear that hum back in nature, that's just a wonderful. It's a wonderful thing, and I'm feeling positive. I mean, every day of the week I could probably go out and find you something negative, but pretty much every day in the week I can go out and find something positive too. And 20 years ago that wouldn't have been the case. It would have pretty much all been negative. So I think we're turning. And I hope we are. And maybe you couldn't have done a podcast like this 20 years ago. Don't know if anyone would have listened to us. And now hopefully lots of people will. And so that's where I think we are turning. The tide is turning. Long way to go. We can't take our foot off the gas, as it were. Got to keep pushing. And but we've got to. I think the government are behind the people. And so once we just keep pushing, and I think Ireland of the future will hopefully be a better Ireland than we have now.
Colin, and it was an absolute pleasure to have you in today. It's definitely not going to be the last time. Thank you very, very much for making the time for us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you, Colin.